Well, that live button tells me we're live. Welcome to a special edition of Coffee, Eggs and Inspiration, this time coming to you from Google, at least the home office of Google. Welcome to my Google home office. And I'm super pleased today to be joined by former All Black Anton Oliver. Welcome, Anton.
Hey, Craig. Hey, everyone. Two
Kiwis on a live stream YouTube. What could possibly go wrong? We'll see. We'll get into it. This is a live stream, so you're able to ask questions. Please feel free to ping them in. We'll see them on the interface that we're using at the moment. And Anton's a nice guy. He won't bite. He loves questions, and the more controversial, the better. I'll give Anton a quick introduction, so he doesn't need to himself. The track record is so impressive, it might take me about 40 minutes. Anton was an All Black, the rugby team, national rugby team of New Zealand for 13 years. Debuted when he was just 19 years old and had a career over that period of 298 first-class games, including a spell as captain, like his father before him, Frank. Retired following the 2007 Rugby World Cup, where New Zealand was knocked out, tears rolling down the face, by France, our nemesis, in the quarterfinals 2018, and that was a game in Cardiff. We bounced back, of course, since then. Anton then spent a period in Toulon for about a year playing professional rugby in France. On the business side, Anton is a very accomplished guy, a degree in commerce and physical education from Otago University, that's in the South Island of New Zealand. Completed while he was playing professional rugby. He's the author of a book, Anton Oliver Inside 2005. Check it out, click it, buy it, read it. Subsequently, after the rugby career, Anton went back to studies, did an MSc, Master of Science in Biodiversity Conservation and Management at Oxford, and then subsequently an MBA from Cambridge. So true Renaissance man, and actually his dissertation was on how to make sense of uncertainty and chaos, a topic that we'll be talking about on this interview today, this fireside chat today. So Anton, a breathtakingly impressive track record. How did the pivot from being a professional sports person at the top of your game, how did the pivot over to business feel at the time?
Thanks for the introduction. So I finished playing rugby professionally in 2008. So if we chunk that, because it's not a homogenous, if we chunk that up into three different bits, because I think three bits broadly describe what was going on. So the first bit, I decided to. So if you want to play rugby for the All Blacks, you have to be living in New Zealand playing. So you can't be playing in France and then go back and playing for the All Blacks. So I'd never had an opportunity to kind of test the counterfactual, which was what would it be like to play rugby for anyone else other than the All Blacks. So at the end of my career, I didn't really know what I was going to do. Single, no children. So I thought I'll go to France, attempt to learn French, which I failed badly at. And I'll give it a go. And the wish, or the intention was, I sort of had that plan 2 years out before I finished playing for the All Blacks, and I wanted to see whether I was good enough to make the team for the 2007 World Cup. Managed to make the team, and wanted to see whether we were good enough to win the cup, and we weren't. So we got beaten by France in the quarterfinals. So within, I think, 2 weeks, I flew from. That game was in Cardiff in Wales. Flew all the way back home, got all my stuff out of my flat, put it in storage, flew all the way back to France, and found myself in a huddle with a whole bunch of people who I didn't know. This is before we were about to go and play a game in Toulon. A whole bunch of people I didn't know. I didn't understand the language that they were saying. We were wearing Toulon's colours of red, and that sounds a bit funny, but I'd never played in red, so that was kind of different, with sponsors who I didn't understand, on a ground that wasn't my ground, in front of people that weren't my people. So it was quite a discombobulating experience. And but I just figured, this will pass, makes sense. I'll get my way through this and it'll be fine. But that feeling only got worse. And I guess after about about 5 months, I decided that wasn't me. I had a 2-year contract, and I was lucky enough to get accepted into Oxford, and so I went to Oxford, leaving rugby, professional rugby behind. I wasn't even going to play rugby at Oxford, but I had a bunch of friends who actually from Cambridge who said, you really should play rugby. It's very unique and different. So I played one more sort of semi-year there. And then I kind of, my mum got sick, and so I went back to New Zealand and kept an eye on her for several months until her chemo sort of came finished. And then I sort of landed myself down in London in about March of 2010. And at that stage, I can only really say this now, looking back on it, I didn't really know what I was going to, but I knew what I was going away from. And as you said in the introduction, I've kind of been in the public life my whole adult life anyway, from 19. And cell phones with cameras and that were all kind of kicking, and you didn't really have any anonymity. And I desperately wanted to find a blank canvas where I could express myself or see who I was or what I could do without the kind of moniker or framing of being an All Black, which in New Zealand is kind of impossible for me. It probably is fine now because I'm old and no one recognizes me. But back then it was kind of difficult. You could say that, well, and I guess I was a bit worried about trying some stuff and it not working in New Zealand, which is kind of, you could probably accuse me of being like not very secure, but maybe I wasn't secure about that. But I just wanted to come over here and see, what am I good at if I'm not like getting paid to stand on people and punch them? What does it that I want to be? Because I had never, if you really want to be good at anything, you have to drill down and just do that. And that's kind of all I'd done. And I had all this space that I hadn't explored or knew anything about. Intuitively knew it was there. I'm quite a curious person, which I think has helped me through time. And so that's the first phase. And I boxed up and landed in London, crashed on a mate's couch for 3 months. His wife wasn't that happy about that after a while. Found myself a job. Didn't really know what I was going to do, to be honest. I started off in a sort of brokerage and sort of ricocheted around for about 3 years and 2 or 3 different jobs. And honestly, I remember the first day where I had a suit and tie and I was behind a machine. I literally looked, it was like metaphorically and figuratively like the gorilla trapped in a cage. I just felt constricted and what am I doing? And it was such a big contrast from where I'd been. But knew I was set on a path and was curious about what was in front of me and was kind of happy to ride through that. And I thought that back then I was I'm still quite idealistic, but I was massively idealistic. When you come out when your job is representing your country like on a weekly basis, like a deep sense of meaning and a purpose are like right front and center of what you do. And so I wasn't one to compromise. I'm still not really, but I think as you get older, you just see the world through a different lens. And so at that stage, I wanted to be kind of like an environmental social crusader, and I wanted to go and help green tech startups and do all of that. But it soon became apparent to me that I didn't really have anything to offer. I wasn't a lawyer, so if you're a startup, it's kind of all hands on deck. You can't subsidize someone like me who didn't have anything to add. So I wasn't a lawyer or an accountant. I couldn't bring those skills to the table. I didn't have huge stacks of capital. Rugby doesn't pay you that much, so I couldn't like be an investor. I wasn't an engineer, so I couldn't actually appraise any of didn't do any coding. Wasn't really much use to anyone, to be fair. I could have done some marketing, but I didn't. The area that I had some agency or leverage was in New Zealand, right? I just left there, so I sort of stepped back and I thought, this isn't working. I'm getting some feedback here that I'm not actually where I want to go. I don't have the skill set. And right around about the same time, 2 other things happened. One thing that happened was my visa was about to expire and I was going to get kicked out of the country. And any of those who know what that's like, it's pretty a terrifying experience. how the visas were done then, at least. They're all done on a point system, so you get points for so you discriminated against your age. So the older you are, the less points you get. I think you had to get like 100 points. If you get degrees, you get points. You speak English, you get points. So the delta of the points that I needed to do to get to my threshold to get my visa was like 60 grand. So I defined 60 grand quickly. And I'd sort of seen this in the coming down the pipe, and I'd started talking to my current employer, M&G. And I ended up having 18 interviews with M&G because my CV was so non-linear. I just kept ricocheting around. They could see some kind of latent value, I guess, but didn't know how to, like, where do we put this? This narrative doesn't make sense to how we see the world. But I was lucky in that the business was going quite well then, and I guess they kind of saw me as a bit of a punt, bit of R&D, and so I managed to get. They paid me all the money up front for work that I hadn't even started, and I got on a train down to Cardiff, and I had to because I had to meet the people face to face because this story just wouldn't have stacked up. How was it that 60 grand's just hit your bank account? I needed to be there to explain it. So anyway, that kind of got me over that hurdle. And around about the same time, I had an epiphanal moment when I went down to, I don't know why, but one Saturday morning I was in Piccadilly Circus. And for those who aren't from London, Piccadilly Circus in sort of non-COVID time, lunchtime on a Saturday is just heaving with people. And I remember I was having all this existential sort of thinking, what am I doing? And I remember popping out out of the tube and like all these people, I'm like, how am I going to differentiate myself versus this? You know, London is the great normal distribution curve. Wherever you think you are, if you think you're fat or ugly, there's people who are fatter or ugly. If you think you're wealthy, there's people who've got more money, taller, shorter. You just get stuck into this distribution. And I'm like, how am I gonna? Because I've been trying to find jobs, etc. What's my edge? And it became very apparent to me. Just I don't know why then, because it was pretty obvious. Well, it's kind of everything that you're running away from. Like in All Black Captain, there aren't that many around. And that's when I realized that I didn't want to leverage off my past. I wanted to start clean and fresh, and I wanted to, whatever I was to become of myself, I didn't want to bring all of that stuff with me. And for anyone listening, my advice would be to you is to not do that because it's quite a naive thing. I think Einstein's attributed to the quote about the power of compounding being the eighth wonder of the world. And compounding doesn't just apply to money, but it applies to anything that we really value: wealth, knowledge, relationships, wisdom, and connectivity. And a career is based on compounding, right? You learn stuff, and then you pivot, and you bring that stuff with you. And of course, what I've done, I've gone to the other side of the world and started doing stuff I had and deliberately severed all my relationships with my previous life, literally in every possible way, and started again. And that's not a pathway to success. I say that now. So, but I was pretty emotionally committed to not being Anton Oliver ex All Black, give me a job. Like that wasn't. I just felt that I could be more than that for whatever reason.
I guess there's a discombobulating indeed, right? And my brother was a professional sports person. He had this sort of existential intersection in his life as well. I'm an expat. I live in London, been here 23 years, but I know exactly, I can really relate to what you're saying, Anton. And I think probably a lot of people who are viewing this can as well. There's so many, London's such a melting pot, right? We've all got this history and we've all come from somewhere, and I guess the lesson in this is not inappropriately leverage what you did in the past, but certainly build on it, because it's a capacity and a skill set that is transferable. And what a wonderful thing that you've done. You're now head of equities and business management and investments at M&G Investments. So you're very humble about your start there, but you're a captain of industry now in a way in the financial services sector, in the largest financial services capital in the world. Let's talk about COVID. Hard not to, right? We're on lockdown. We're just about a couple of weeks after the anniversary of lockdown here in London, at least, it's been for all of us a time of uncertainty, chaos, fear. In many ways, you must have experienced emotions like that on the field. Did you? And if so, what lessons have you applied that have been helpful for you in lockdown?
Yeah, so I'm going to use, in this instance, lockdown as a synonym for business, because I think lockdown in many ways has brought new challenges, but it's exacerbated the stuff in business, right? It's squashed and pressured a lot of the normal BAU. We're having to do it just in a different operating environment. Plus with customers, the choices and all the rest of it changing. So it's kind of like BAU on steroids. I think that's what lockdown has done with some new stuff. But what I've observed kind of in the steady state that I've been with my current employer, M&G, for the last 7 or 8 years, the things that I recognize in me that are different than my colleagues, that have kind of, not because of the me, I think, because the environment from sport sort of inculcated them in me. The first one, I think, in professional sport, it's the public nature of it. I think all professional sport, probably by definition, is public. So my successes and failures were shared on a weekly basis with millions of people, and there's just nowhere to hide, right, on both sides of that ledger. And I've noticed that play out for me, mostly in a positive aspect, for sort of 2 or 3 different ways. One, accountability. The first one about the public nature of it has been able to handle pressure. I think I've, on a continuum of outcomes, one from being like ecstasy and one from being like failure in front of hundreds of people, I've experienced that kind of spread. And so when I come into a working environment, having already, a lot of fear is based around the unknown or what if, but if you've already been there and felt kind of humiliation and shame and failure, these are heavy words and emotions, but that's kind of what you feel when you're captaining a team and you don't perform well and you lose on a big scale, right? That stuff is kind of redolent in with you. So I've felt all of that. So anything we're experiencing now doesn't feel like a big deal to me from a business perspective. So my understanding of pressure, I think, is because I've had that, is I think I look at what's going on and I don't hang my hat on all of that. So that would be the first one. The second one, I think that professional sport has kind of helped me is being okay with accountability. Again, that notion of being public and everyone witnessing it. You just have to, if you're going to be a professional sports person for a long time, if you don't lean into being accountable, you don't survive, right? In a team sport, you get tinned, and if you're a single sports person, you're clearly accountable because you're the only one holding the racket or the golf club. And so I've found that a lot of in business, particularly if you're in a consensus sort of collegiate space, accountability is not. A lot of people aren't accountable, they're not comfortable with that. And the other thing I'd say about professional sport from the public side is the ego bit. So rugby's such a combative game. I've been sat on my butt and knocked out and punched people, and they've punched me back. So I've experienced all of that. And so if you do that long enough, you kind of mean revert and everything's cool, because I know there are people out there who are bigger, stronger, tougher, faster, smarter. And that's helped me a lot as well, just working with people, because it's not really about me. And if you think about teams, the last thing that I would say that professional sports helped me with in business and lockdown is an innovation cycle. So rugby, your product is like every 7 days. Every 7 days, you've got a chance to play another game. And you're on that cadence. And so I've got a quant team that report to me who I know all the language about they have a stand-up and they've got a squad and they do sprints and all the rest of it. So it's similar to that from the kind of Google tech world. But that kind of drumbeat of performing every 7 days, where if you don't innovate and change what you did last week, you fail. And within that, you've got rugby's at 80 minutes. So within that 7 weeks, you've got 80 minutes where you absolutely have to make decisions in front of you. Otherwise, you don't win. And I think that being able to operate under that kind of pressure and being able to make those decisions has really helped me, particularly around conflict. I think in group dynamics, particularly English culture, Brits don't actually say what they think or feel or mean. Is you have to deconstruct this whole construct. And I had to go on a bit of a journey of moderating it wasn't so much my language, but how it came across, because I was used to like, right, let's make a decision, no egos at the door, we're doing it for the right reasons. And of course, that doesn't really land that well with people who don't come out of that kind of brutal environment. But it's in my experience that if you want to be part of like the teams that succeed or excel the most get all the stuff on the table, right? All the stuff that's hidden is on the table. The teams that aren't as successful, it's in behind the curtain, it's underneath the carpet, anywhere but on the table. And I think you need to be able to construct or construe conflict as a means for good, right? You're actually just having the discussion. If you want to frame it as conflict, you can, but let's get the conversations on the table. And I think that's helped me a lot as well.
Well, I love the description you gave of innovation cycles and these quick sprints and how that works and transfers from professional sports into business. James Kerr wrote a book about this called Legacy, and one of the principles that he talks about in the book is when you're on top of your game, you change your game.
Yeah.
He cites that as an All Blacks principle. Have you read the book, and if so, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you do. I think it's very, very hard. And inevitably, and this is just something I kind of come to believe over time, I think the only way to really make the leap forward, is to fail. I think failure is the only way to really go bone deep and learn the lessons. It's really hard to learn. So I think Google should always be thinking about, in any business, like trying to deconstruct themselves, decompose themselves, attack their own business model, and think about what's coming next. Because if you don't do that, someone else is going to do it too. You're going to lose market share. And if you look at sports people who have gone on a winning streak for any period of time, when they finally lose that streak and you listen to them afterwards, they will almost always, without exception, say, I thought I was, doing everything. I thought I was mentally there, but there's something about losing that brings you back to square one, that deconstructs everything. It's like a forest fire. So a lot of stuff in nature, forest fire goes through, cleans stuff out, but then it's got seeds that are there for the fire that grow from the forest that grow. I think that's really important.
The process of renewal, in a way. I want to stay on this for a moment, because you've hit something here that I think is really critical and very relevant to the topic of well-being and how teams work. You talk about going bone deep and having everything out on the table, and in a way, embracing your failures as an opportunity for renewal. Easier said than done, right? How do you create an environment in which it's safe enough to do that?
Yeah. Well, for a start, I don't know how many times I've said failure, but I don't think failure is a healthy word. I think it's imbued and it's full of so much emotional baggage, right? So, I didn't perform to what I expected, or something's probably better. It's a bit of a probably. You look at me, I'd probably say failure quite a bit about myself. It's probably say something about how hard I am on my own. So creating safe spaces where people feel like they are listened to and heard is. I think if we just step back from that and think about resilience in the workplace. So you can do it from a systems level, which is what you're talking about, like a team-based thing. Then you can look at the individual, and then you can look intra-individual. So we start at the team level and creating safe spaces. I think we've all had experiences of everyone who's listening or watching reflects on a team environment where they felt listened, or it was an enjoyable experience. If they deconstruct why that was, that's not rocket science. If we did that over, that's well known in literature. If you deconstruct the things that you need for a healthy team environment, that's well known. What's hard for it to replicate and reproduce it on a repeatable basis is the how. So the what is relatively clear. Teams need to sort of have some traditions. They have a sense of relevance. They need to have some behaviors and an identity and execution, all that good stuff. But how you execute that's really hard. people and teams is such a difficult multivariant equation. We've all got different gender identities. We've come from different parts of the world. We speak different languages. We've got different cultural and religious worldviews. Now, getting even 5 people with all of that in a room thinking the same way is really difficult. It requires skilled authorship and curatorship of that space, where you recognize everyone's, where they're from emotionally, not just like, I'm from New Zealand. That takes a lot of attention. I think a lot of people who get up in management probably do it so they recognize from a skill set, I'm a good coder, so I've become the head of coding. Whereas actually, I think you need to unbundle that, and people who get further up need to be way more connected into emotional intelligence and people's needs. I think that is a big thing. So you got the team aspect, then you got the individual aspect around kind of resilience, and I loosely break that into body and mind. So my experience about body is that I feel like if I start doing some physical exercise, I end up being way more committed to dietary choices. And if I get those 2 things working in unison, I sleep better. I have a better sense of self and a self-esteem, not hating on myself because I can feel my tummy rolling down. I end up being with a higher sort of level of confidence and assurity about myself. I just feel better about the world, and it comes from inside and it projects outside. So that's the kind of the body bit. And the mind bit, that is, so that's the bit in isolation, but also the bit that you plug into the systems thinking, into the team. Like, if the team is a massively tight, cohesive, you could be feeling vulnerable and upset and negative, but if you plug into a team, for that time that you're in the team, it can kind of insulate you, and you can feed off the team, and it can make you a better person. Like, there's some research in the 70s by a guy called Tajfeld on social identity theory, and his whole shtick is that the social milieu or group that you so we all wear different identities and have different hats, father, son, dad, whatever. But depending on what in social environment, that dictates who we are. And in England, an obvious example would be kind of the mild-mannered accountant. During the working week, it doesn't sort of swear or anything like that. But actually, when he's also a Millwall football supporter, and at the weekends he fights people in the aisles. So the environment that you're in can dictate your behaviour. So individual and the environment can help, but the individual in and of itself, and the mind and how you think about yourself, and the mental models and protocols and constructs you got whizzing around in here, that's probably the thing that I've spent the most time on personally in the last decade, is just understanding what's going on in here, because I think I think we all like to think that, like, our thinking mind, our prefrontal cortex, we are making decisions knowingly, and I'm in control of all of the logic and faculties. But I don't agree with that. I think a lot of our decisions are based on childhood experiences, and most of us are being led by, we wouldn't like to admit it, but the emotional Anton, 45-year-old Anton, most of my decisions in my life have actually been made by the emotional kind of needs of a 5-year-old Anton. And to get back to that point and figure out what was going on, that I think is a big part of the resilience piece, because you start to deconstruct the automatic thinking and the automatic responses you've got into an environment. You kind of need to go back to that.
Well, thanks for being so vulnerable and talking about that so openly. I'm going to flip to rugby, and we'll come back to the more serious topics at hand in a moment. My rugby playing or fan colleagues would not forgive me if I didn't ask you a few questions about your time as an All Black. What's your most memorable match, most memorable game? And please, a reminder for those of you who are on view at the moment, live view, you can ask your own questions. I'll pick them up here, and I'll shoot them over to Anton. Most memorable game, Anton, and why?
Well, it probably fits nicely with this notion of resilience. It was a game. So I was the captain of the All Blacks at the time, and we were playing Ireland over here in Ireland, and we'd never been beaten by Ireland before. This is like in 2001. And it's really the preceding events that made it my most memorable game, because the game before that, I think was about 2 months before that, and I was also the captain then, and we lost against Australia in Australia, and it was a bad loss, and I played badly, and basically everything fell under that most white hot pressure. I didn't perform well, and I had to sit with that for 2 months. And there was at the end of that game, the All Black coaches got fired. And a new coach got put in, and I didn't think that new coach, based on that, and I didn't know them, would select me. So I basically started from shame, humiliation, rejection, all that kind of heavy judgment stuff, and didn't think I was going to make to luckily making the team and being the captain. And then we were playing this game, and they made a whole bunch of new changes. So I was the captain of a team where the whole infrastructure had changed. So it was a deeply insecure space. And we went over to, and I didn't want to be the captain of the first team, all the All Blacks that got beaten by Ireland. Like, that's not a great positive motivating thing, but like, fear is a legitimate motivating force, and that was fear of failure was resonating strongly. And I ended up having a blinder, and I played really, really well. And I still remember a lot of the guys went out into Dublin that night to enjoy the game and enjoy Guinness and all the rest of it. And I just stayed in the team room and had some beers with one of the masseuses and lay down on the tackle bags, and was just like, oh, wow, that was quite intense in a journey I've just been for the last 2 months. It was really, really satisfying. Most things in life that you really value, you've had to work hard for, right? It's taken an effort.
Totally. I was at a certain game very recently at Lansdowne Road, All Blacks versus Irish. It was a different outcome. I thoroughly deserved the win. Let me say that to my Irish colleagues who are watching.
All I can say selfishly is thank goodness it wasn't me on the field.
Exactly. But, some of that, talking about picking yourself up and working hard to get back in the game, so to speak, it's really timely at the moment. We're just going through our biannual performance cycle at the moment. And,
right.
Many of us will receive a disappointing result, right? Others will be elated with their outcome. For those who receive a disappointing result, what's your advice?
So I just went through my performance review as well, and I got what's called a good and effective, which is kind of middle of the road. My advice to that would be, if I take a step back. So professional rugby, when you're playing professional sport, if you read everyone's opinions, that's not a good place to be. You lose control of the narrative. And so I decided a long time ago that I would not give away my personal power to someone else's sort of judgment. Because if you do that, you're in a really perilous state, right? You've lost control of your own internal kind of emotional regulation. And it may be that your boss has given you a rating or a score or whatever, how you've measured, that you don't agree with. But I would just, I'm like, okay, that's your opinion. That's not how I evaluated that, and move on. I think it's difficult, back to the resilience piece, and actually sports people, are particularly boxing. I think there's something about boxing where historically a lot of the great boxers have come from like quite damaged homes and quite underprivileged places. And so where they start to where they end, that arc is just like quite magnified. And in doing so, they end up putting all of their identity and sense of self in the thing that they're doing. So I'm Anton, I'm a rugby player. So you start saying like your occupation is who you are. And then of course, if that goes badly, if I have a bad game, then the obvious go back the other way, that I'm a bad person because I didn't play well.
Yeah,
and so
identity from your,
you need to separate your identity. So from your working life as a Googler or anywhere, you're more than that. You're a sum of all sorts of stuff, and that just happens to be one bit of you that you're expressing. You did say it is biannual. For 6 months, someone's appraising one bit of you for 6 months.
Yeah.
that just ring fence that, and it's one person's view or a few people's view, but that's not in totality who you are. That's how I was looking at that.
Great advice. We've got some live stream questions flowing. I'll put the first one on the screen there from Fergal O'Connor. Thanks, Fergal, for the question. Hi, Craig. What's Anton's current view of the All Black team and coaching team? Recent results and form have been below par for the All Blacks.
Right.
What needs to change to return them to the top? Nice controversial question. Thank you very much, Fergal.
Good question. No one's going to listen to me anymore. I think we should have been more bold, actually, after. Sorry, people who don't know rugby. I'm going to slightly slip into rugby vernacular because Fergal's requested it. I think we should have been more bold at the end of the 2015 World Cup in London. Top of the game, change your game. We didn't live up to our own kind of epithet there. We stayed with the status quo, and I could sort of see the decay slowly over the 4-year period. I think we've kind of just done the same. I think we should have gone with the guy Scott Robinson, and actually had a go and taken a punt. If you look at Team New Zealand, which is a sailing, New Zealand's just won the America's Cup again, and we did so by yes, exactly. We're wearing black to commemorate it. I don't know anything about sailing, so I'm just reading. My knowledge that I'm saying here is just what I've read, but what we've done in New Zealand over the last kind of couple of decades in sailing is we continue to swing the bat and have a go and around our design and our innovation, and it's the last couple of times it's won. So we won it in Bermuda and it's worked. But if you don't push it out there, like if you stay in that comfortable space, then everything. I kind of believe everything that we want to achieve in life is always outside of where we are. There's like this mind the gap moment for those who live in London. If you get on a tube, there's a mind the gap moment. And that for me is a metaphor in life. Most things I really want in life are on the other side of that mind the gap. Now, the amount of training and personal work, and if you're in a sports place, training and diet and stretching and exercise and plyometrics, that closes the gap, but there's still a gap. And that gap that's the risk return gap. And I think, back to the rugby question, I think we've been too conservative. I think we should have been bold. We lost. We didn't win we lost. England gave us some hiding. So that for me was like a risk-free trade of, right, let's start again and let's be bold and go, just like Team New Zealand have done. So that's how I'd answer that.
Great answer, and thanks for the question, Fergal. Speaking of risk-free trades, or the opposite of that, here's one. Bitcoin and crypto, are you a believer or a hater?
I think fiat currency is it's the only reason it's got any store of value is people believe that it has, right? So nation states is putting their balance sheet behind it. I think cryptos it might not be Bitcoin, it might probably be Ethereum or another more advanced one, but I think it's just a matter of time before. I was listening to a podcast by Naval Ravikant, I think his surname, a super smart guy from Silicon Valley. And he was saying, like, you can literally cross borders with $1 billion so as long as you haven't lost your key, you can cross borders with $1 billion in your head, kind of thing. I just think that and the distributed ledger, for me, the distributed ledger is the most revolutionary thing since the internet started. And you can't stop technology. It's just this monster that keeps, you guys are right at the front end of it. I wish asset management's a lot slower and sleepier, and it's getting its face ripped off it by companies who are far more agile and thinking more into the future.
Well, thank you. What an erudite answer, and thanks, Carl Fernandez, for the question. Let's go to Amanda here. Amanda, you've got amazingly strong credentials, both in sport and business. How do people react when they find out that you're the ex-All Black captain?
Okay, thanks, Amanda. So I don't say anything in workings. I don't advertise. Based on what I said before, I don't talk about my previous life. Obviously, when you look at me, you probably wouldn't have thought I was a ballet dancer. So people either think I was some kind of MMA prize fighter or a bare knuckle fighter or Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So they kind of get a sense that I've lived another life, but I don't say anything. So Some people, if they're real rugby fans, then I'll get. I may have been on a meeting and someone would have told them, and then a little message will come out and someone will reach out and want to contact. But because I don't broadcast it, people don't know. I don't think. Or
and if they do register, so Amanda's sort of parenthetical question here: how do you respond? Do you sort of just move on or engage?
Oh no, hey, look, if people want to, it's such a kind thing. Let's take this to another extension. So when I was playing, it's such an easy thing to spend like 2 seconds to do my autograph, and then I was that kid at one point, right? And you've just given a kid an amazing, you've just shared something with them, and it's really arrogant not to do that. They just so in a working context, if someone wants to know about me and my life, then I'm happy to share. But I guess I'm saying I'm not going to go on the front foot and disclose it, like, it feels like a long time ago. But if they want to know about it, then happy to share.
Thanks, Anton. And you are very gracious. I know Fergal's got some good just retorting advice. Bring back Joe Schmidt. Thanks for that, Fergal. Alex has got a question here. The 2007 World Cup, I remember watching it. You remember playing it.
Yeah.
We lost to France. It was a national tragedy in Cardiff. How did you get over that?
Well, that's taken a long time to get over, because for me personally, my All Black sort of road stopped there. And I think that's why it's been more difficult for me. A lot of my peers stayed on and played. People like Richie and Dan and Kevy Mialava. There's a whole bunch, Tony Woodcock, Manonu, Conrad Smith. They went on and had the ability, kept their hat in the ring, kept throwing the dice, made the next World Cup and won it. And so I think talking to a lot of them, that kind of exercised the demons. But I was stuck with that. I was kind of voiceless, stuck with that sense of loss, and I had that for the longest time. Probably took me. I had real negative feelings around that and identity and self, and because it's a team game, but you kind of take some of that stuff personally. But I only probably exercised that. It may have taken me about a decade, if I'm too honest, to let that one go.
Right.
Decade. To completely exercise the demons where there's nothing going on. I went back to New Zealand in 2011 as a commentator for the Rugby World Cup then. And it's really, I'm not proud to say this, but when the boys won that game then, I really desperately I was just very jealous. I wanted to be in the changing room. I wanted to share an experience of things that they were doing. I started saying to myself, I shouldn't have left, because they still had 3 hookers in, and I thought I was good enough to be playing. And I didn't test the counterfactual. I was just playing the story to myself. And then the following World Cup, which was another 4 years, I was commentating at Twickenham. I was the on-field commentator at half-time and had to get there early to get through all the security. And I got there early and walked into our changing room. One of the guys who I'd known was there, and I didn't feel anything then. And then I realised, it's somewhere in those 4 years, it's slowly moved on. It's a weird thing sometimes, isn't it? I don't know why. But
good on you. I'm going to bring you back to wellbeing for a moment. You kind of hit this topic slightly earlier on and talked about diet and exercise. You must have been trained by the most amazing professionals in this space. Yeah. What's your advice for maintaining wellbeing from a dietary and exercise point of view?
Hey, look, I'm not a professional. I'll just get that off the bat. Do what you can. There are so many really rich and interesting people on the internet who have shared their experiences from being, morbidly obese to being something that, is at the opposite end of that. My personal story is that I've really struggled to find why I struggled initially to stop so when rugby stopped, I was still training like to the level I was going to vomit type training with that intensity. I was attacking life through that particular kind of And after a while, I just ran out of gas, because I know it wasn't being fed by anything. I wasn't playing anything. I was doing, what am I doing all of this? I was just sort of stuck on autopilot. And then I went through a big dive where I didn't want to go to the gym at all because gym felt like work. And now I'm kind of at the other end of that, 45, where it's really about it's not performance-based anymore. It's about me feeling good about myself, and therefore, if I'm looking after my own kind of inner world, then I'm a better husband, I'm a better father, I'm a better work colleague. But work for me is tough, man. I get up, my daughter's waking up at like 5 in the morning at the moment, so I get up there, and then I've got meetings, crammed full of meetings. And, I've been going for runs late at night, like 7, 8 o'clock lately, and I've got to find a better way. I've got to find a way of putting it into my diary, but I know it's important. What I also do, I've got a whole personal. I'm every morning I've got like a routine that I try to do. So I journal every day. So I have it's almost like a spiritual chiropractor. I'm a bit emotionally. I've had to teach myself how to be cognizant of my own feelings and what's inside, because it'll just lay there latent and pop up in really weird ways that I don't want it to. So I've had to create like a process where I have an inner dialogue. I have a dialogue with my inner world, and how I do that, for me anyway, is I write, and I just start writing in free fall, and over time, over half an hour, I do this on daily practice. Stuff pops out, right? What was that? And you just, if you're curious, and you follow the thread, and so that's what I do. And then I meditate every day. Usually after that, if I've got time, if my daughter's not waking up at 5 in the morning. And I've got probably about 3 different meditative practices. Some are just like trying to be super mindful. Some are like a bit more surrendering, and some are a bit more aspirational, a bit more manifesting. And then I try to do, and then have some reflective space at the end of the day where I just try to cap off. But that's the plan. And every 2 or 3 weeks on a Sunday, I just sit back and just take a bit more of a macro view and see, how am I tracking to the bigger goals that I want for that life, for that year? And so I don't deviate. So if I am starting to deviate, I can course correct early enough. And some of my bigger goals now, sorry? You want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Like I used to be, for most of this conversation, I've just been talking about me, because I think most of my life I've been an incredibly self-centered and selfish individual, kind of doing what I have wanted to do. And to a certain extent, I think you can construct an argument that any relationship, the primary responsibility is to yourself, because if you start trying to meet someone else's needs, you've got no control over those. Those always move. But actually, if you come from a place internally and that's rock solid, then you're going to attract people that you've got to get a better fit. But I think most of my choices, in rugby and also post-rugby, were just kind of about where I was at in the world. So, but now my choices as a dad, and my wife's about to have another child, it's a lot broader, and that's changed my attitude to thinking about things, and also my risk tolerance. When I first came to London, I swing the bat. It was only me. Something went wrong. I was the one in the gun. But now I've got to be a bit more thoughtful about the risks that I take and the ramifications and the implications for those involved. I don't want to be stifled by that, but you certainly are aware of that.
Well, it's a perfect segue to Tarana's question here, who asks, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but what's your process for making big changes and decisions, and has it evolved since you've moved from professional sport to business? Great question. Thanks, Tarana.
What's my process? So the first time I ever did that was wanting to be an All Black, I guess, and I made that decision when I was 15. I failed. Let's see if I'm using failure again. I didn't make a South Island under 16 team, and I came back home, and I'm quite autodidactic, which has been both a strength and a weakness. So a lot of my learnings come from internally, and they're kind of heuristic, and I follow those. And I happened to, as luck or fate would have it, I came across a book that empowered me to think that actually I need to change some stuff. And I ended up making the team and ended up making New Zealand team. When I made that first New Zealand team, that kind of ratified in me that I was good enough to be an All Black. And so I cracked on and became an All Black a couple of years later. It was kind of crazy how it all manifesting happened. I didn't know what I was doing, but if you go back and look at kind of quantum thinking, and I was kind of doing that intuitively. So to answer your question, because I've had that success once, I've kind of replicated that through my life. I don't see any barriers within reason. Like, I'm not going to be a heart surgeon or a massive great coder, but within reason, if I want to do something, I do it. And I guess that's based on that confidence of having done it once before. So to give you some more, just to validate that. So yeah, I was one of the youngest All Blacks forwards probably of all time to have done that. And then I did a couple of degrees when rugby was still professional and no one had really done that. I went to Cambridge, Oxford, and did a science degree effectively and I was the oldest in the class by about 8 years, had no science background, but I didn't see that as an impediment. Felt kind of insecure in the space, but when I was shooting for the goal, I thought, I'm going to do that. I just get so laser on what I want to do. I just don't see the impediments, and I'm going to do that. When I did my MBA at Oxford, Cambridge, I'd done no business, and I was surrounded by all these like really impressive people, but I thought, actually, I'm going to do that. So I'm hearing myself tell you, because I've never actually deconstructed this, that I focus on the prize, and I make that so bright and so illuminating and so compelling that that's where I want to go. And then if you do that, then you tend not to see the pitfalls. Or if you see them, it's like, oh, it's not such a big deal, and you plan and you iterate and you kind of get rid of them. But you just keep going to your North Star. And I think that's what I've done. I think that if you do that, it kind of stimulates all sorts of imaginative, emotional stuff that's really quite compelling. And that's how I've gone.
Well, we've been mates for a while, Anton, and I've certainly seen you do this. And you're an extraordinary aspiration in the way that you do it, actually, just this sort of visualization and then determination that follows it. It's unstoppable. We're approaching the top of the hour here, so I want to end talking about mindset, and it's beautifully leads on, hopefully, from what you were just describing. We all have our story. We all have our domestic circumstances right now, which are on a scale of tough to very tough. Any advice that you have from what you've learned over the years on how each of us can manage our own mindset? You've talked about your journaling, for example. Is there any techniques or tips that you can leave us with today?
Yeah, I think it's really important to atomize a day and just break it down. Like when things are really tough. So we've all had children at home over COVID, and I've only had one in the house ricocheting around, but I don't know how people have had more have done it, but you kind of have done it. Somehow you've made your way through. When you go back and reflect, and how does that happen? If you talk to women who've given birth, the body's got this amazing thing that somehow it doesn't make you recognize how extraordinarily painful that was. So I try to atomize and I just need to get through the next hour. If it's really, and just keep bringing it back to, let's just get through the next 5 minutes. And if you accumulate those up, well, this is when it's really quite tough. And just get yourself over the finishing line. And at the end of the day, going, I made it. I got through that. And it's at times, this is really quite hard for me. I'm not very good at self-praise and recognition, but even if I go for a run, a really hard run, I have to stop and tell myself, that was really good, Anton. You did well there. And I think just giving yourself that permission to go, I got through that day. I think more broadly, if you can somehow construct a mindset where you become comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that's hard depending on where you're at, but there's so much stuff coming at us. And if you're a person that likes things to be really quite rigid and structured, it's not, that's not a very, it's not a model that's like building a house, a massive building on an earthquake fault line that's not, it's got no room to move, and you know stuff's going to move. So just as a philosophical, I never realized I was doing this, but in coming over here, I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. And in fact, I think I'm traversing to a place where I'm uncomfortable being comfortable, which is not so great for my wife and those around me, but I get a bit scratchy if things are steady state. I kind of need to smell the blood. I've realized in a working environment, I'm not good at process. So sitting down with internal assurance, and that's not a job for me. I'm no good at that. I need to be out at the front where things are happening at a pace. So stepping back, get yourself through the day, get yourself through those micro moments, give yourself permission and pat yourself on the back, sit back in quiet moments. How do I create a model and a way of thinking about the world where I'm comfortable with uncertainty? And the other thing I'd just, in finishing, say that I think it's entirely, mostly able to control the way that you think. Like when I get up in the morning, I can choose to be happy, sad, maudlin. No, if my mum had just died, I don't think I can get my way around that. But mostly in a normal day, we can choose how to think, and therefore it's kind of CBT stuff. I think that's all within our gift.
Well, there's not a conversation you and I have where I don't walk away with some brilliant insight. So get yourself through those micro moments, be kind to yourself on the way, become comfortable with discomfort, and manage the way that you think. We can choose to be happy, sad, or somewhere in between. Not always, but often. Anton Oliver, you're an absolute inspiration. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.